So it is 9:20 and I call this meeting of the Board of Investments to order.
Recording in progress.
Good morning. It's 9:20 and I call this meeting of the Board of Investments to order. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. David, how do you feel about leading us through the Pledge of Allegiance?
Stand. Hand over your heart. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Whenever we do that, I have this irrational fear that I'm going to forget the words. Okay, moving on. Item 3, procedure for teleconference. Do we have any requests? Nope. Okay, moving on. Do we have a motion for the approval of the minutes?
So move.
Oh,
yeah.
roll call.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I'm here to serve.
Thank you, Mr. Knox.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. This meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting and in person, so I will do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Mr. Knox?
Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Santos?
Present.
Mr. Green?
Present.
Mr. Rue?
Present.
Mr. Jones?
Present.
Mrs. Jones?
Present.
Ms. Sanchez?
Present.
Okay. Staff participating in the meeting include the following: CIO John Grable, CEO Santos Kryman, Chief Counsel Stephen Wright, DCIO Drew Perez, DCEO Louis Lugo, AEOs JJ Popovich and Laura Guglielmo, Interim CFO Ted Granger, Legislative Affairs Officer Barry Liu, investment staff Dale Johnson, John Kim, Sanaya Ganoyan, Catherine Tan, Cheryl Liu, Krista Powell, Cindy Rivera, Ron Kanwa, Noah Damsky. Consultants in the room are Makita Group, Alborn, Stepstone. Trustees, please use your raise your hand option to be placed into queue. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute your mic until you're ready to speak. And now we will proceed with the agenda and the minutes.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Mr. Santos made the motion?
Yes, ma'am.
And the second was David. Okay, 1 second.
It's so much fun. It's like playing a video game.
Mrs. Jones and Mr. Rue? You're not seeing it? Okay. Is it a yes?
Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Okay, moving on. Do we have public comment?
We do. I will call on Hannah Cornfield. Hannah, you will have 3 minutes to address the board.
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Hannah Cornfield. I am a researcher at Koreatown Immigrant Workers Alliance, KIWA, and we came to you all at your June board meeting. It's nice to see you again, and we come to you again in solidarity with the COE USA workers. LACERA invests in the company COE, and we come to urge you again for the LACERA Board of Investment to send a letter to COE demanding that the company recognize the COE USA Workers Union. COE USA continues to refuse to recognize the will of the workers to unionize. And amidst the company's refusal, the company continues to mistreat its workers and to violate their workers' rights. And you'll hear more about that in public comments to come. And the Department of Labor is currently investigating the company's alleged violations. And so we also come to you today after the workers of the city of Los Angeles went on strike for a day yesterday to demand better wages and working conditions. And board member David Green, I'm not sure if he is here today, but president of SEIU 721, we really appreciated his words. And he said, people don't understand the hard work that the workers do. There's a lot of unsung heroes in the city. So I think it's important that that we take a day to recognize that and let the city know they need to respect what we do as city employees. So we ask that you view the struggles of the workers of the city of Los Angeles as the same struggle as the COA USA workers. In addition, the city has used public dollars to actually purchase COA products, such as air filtration systems and filters. And so this supports a company that is currently exploiting its workers. And we want the company to succeed. We want that to be very clear. We want the company to succeed. And so we want the company to be better and to treat its workers with respect and dignity. We're really grateful to be able to speak with you today. And we urge the Board of Investments of LACERA to send a letter to COA to demand and urge that the company recognize the union, which the workers have already won in the election. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And next we'll call on Sun Young Oh. You will have 3 minutes to address the board.
Good morning. My name is Sun Oh. I have been working at COA as a Cody, doing sales and service for 8.5 years. I'd like to share my story of why I started working at COA. I've been living as a single mother of 2 children for the past 18 years. Due to financial hardship, my children and I had to move to a different place almost every year until I entered COA. Working as a Cody at COA was the perfect job for me because it was self-scheduled and affordable that I could spend time caring for my young children myself. I was thankful to COA for giving my life stability. However, the comfort of my life became shattered since my company started changing the regulations and atmospheres of workplace. My paycheck got deducted to almost 70% of the old paycheck at the same performance. The company removed most of the award programs that helped us earn extra money to our service and sales commission. They also deducted our commissions for many reasons, such as taking a portion of the promotion the company gifted to customers out of our own pockets. Competition within the company workers became very fierce. I often could hear people arguing with each other over a sales order. Unethical practices and unfair treatment was getting worse in the company. Due to broken morale and will from the reduced paychecks, workers kept coming in and out of the company. A lot of workers were threatened of not maintaining the basic livelihood. In my case, about a year ago, I moved into my cousin's guest studio behind her house to make up for the financial gap made by the deducted paycheck. I worked in COA for more than 8.5 years, and I officially got a raise of $2.50 per service. But in actuality, my paycheck got reduced to almost 2/3. In the last 8.5 years, the cost of living in California almost doubled. Gas prices doubled, and minimum wage increased by 70%. However, factoring in the supposed $2.50 raise I received, I should be earning almost $26.30, which is still low when accounting for the living cost of the Los Angeles. My salary in 2015 was still much higher than my current salary because my hourly wage from 2015 to now has only increased by $2.50, which I can interpret.
Your 3 minutes is up.
Pardon?
Your 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. So is it up?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll call on Charlie Singh. Mr. Sang, you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
안녕하세요. 저는
Actually, we'll add 6 minutes for the translation.
오케이. 안녕하세요. 만나서 반갑습니다. 저는 찰리 상이라고 합니다.
Hi, nice to see you all. My name is Charlie Shin.
코웨이 미국 법인에서 2007년부터 지금까지 일하고 있는 테크니션입니다.
And I'm a Kuwait technician working in Kuwait since 2007.
정상적으로 정식 직원이 된 거는 2020년부터입니다.
And I was officially hired at 2020.
근데 그동안은 처음에 제가 하이어 될 때는 직원으로 알고 있었지만 나중에 알고 보니 1099이었습니다.
So at first when I was hired by Kuwait, I thought I was an official staff, but turns out I was working under 1099.
중간에 회사도 별도로 생겨서 저희들이 모두 다 코웨이에서 큐텍이라는 회사로 옮겨진 적도 있습니다.
And there was this instance where we're all outsourced to this company called QTAG instead of Kuwait.
코웨이라는 회사에서는 결국 지금도 2020년 전까지는 2019년까지는 코웨이 직원이 아닌 그냥 일반 개인 사업자로 추정하고 있습니다.
And I believe that up until 2019, we're working under 1099 and not as an official staff of Kuwait.
1099 있을 때는 사람이 다쳐도 전혀 코웨이에서는 신경도 쓰지도 않았고 다른 베네핏도 전혀 없었습니다.
And when we were under 1099, the Kuwait has never given us any benefits, nor cared about us when we were injured or sick.
아파도 제대로 치료도 못 받고 일을 못하면 수입이 없었기 때문에 아파도 일할 수밖에 없었습니다.
So even though we were injured and sick, we couldn't treat ourselves. And because if we don't work, we can't make our living. Even though we were sick and injured, we still had to come out to work.
그리고 큐텍이라는 별도 회사가 만들어져서 저희들이 옮겨졌을 때 결국 코웨이는 계약 회사라는 입장으로 일은 똑같이 코웨이를 10몇 년 동안 했었지만 결국 취급은 외부 사업자 취급을 받았습니다.
So when we were outsourced to QTAG, Kuwait still made us do all the same work as a full-time worker in Kuwait, but they left all the responsibility to the outsourced company.
결국 그 큐텍 회사의 사장은 다시 코웨이의 매니저로 다시 들어와서 일하고 있는 상황입니다.
And so now the owner of QTAG is now working under Kuwait as a manager.
이러한 상황들을 여태까지 겪어본 건데 코웨이의 운영 방식을 바꾸지 않으면 더 이상 발전이 힘들 것 같습니다.
And based on my experience, I believe that if Kuwait doesn't change their way of management, then they'll have no further development.
테크니션들은 여태까지 지금까지도 미니멈 웨이지를 받고 있는 시급을 받고 있습니다.
And even now, the Kuwait technicians are receiving minimum wage.
결국은 이러한 제도를 바꿔야만 코웨이가 더 발전하고 돈을 많이 벌 수 있는 입장이 될 거라고 생각합니다.
I believe that only by changing their way of management, they can improve and advance further on.
많이 도와주시기 바랍니다. 감사합니다.
And I sincerely ask for your help as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll call on Jin Kim. Mr. Kim, you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, the board member, to allow to share this story with you. My name is Jin Kim. I'm an organizer here in Koreatown Immigrant Workers Alliance. That I'm supporting this hardworking employee who are trying to unionize their company, Kuwait. You have heard the testimony of Mrs. Oh and Mr. Sang. These people devoted many years to build this company, working during the pandemic because people didn't want to go outside to buy water, and they're working overtime, driving 100 to 150 miles a day, providing service and sacrificing their life to get the job done. The company should appreciate their effort and demonstrate the appreciation by giving them better wages, working conditions, and respect. None of this were offering of this worker. Kuwait is not a company that can just replace any worker. These workers have already established a relationship with the customer, giving them good service and bringing a new customer by word to mouth without much advertising. The sales and service are average of 150 order per person a month, working after hour, taking phone call from the customer 24/7, and still they don't get any compensation. If this condition don't change, a lot of good employee will quit. They will hire new employee, and it will take time and train and build up that relationship. The new employee will realize this bad environment, and they will quit too. This will cause a domino effect. Eventually, the employee will leave, the company will not reach the profit margin, and the investor will lose their share value. We're not trying to bankrupt the company. We're trying to work together because this company was built up by the worker, and they are very proud expanding this tiny country of Korea, bring it to the US. They will not give up offering this great service to the public unless the company doesn't give them any, that what they really deserve them. I'm supporting these wonderful people to unionize, and they can have, so they could be able to have better life. But the company instead, they could rather spend their money and anti-union lawyer and trying to pursue the worker instead of giving compensation. We urge the LACERA board member to write a letter to Koei to recognize the union, which is ensure to become a better company and better community ally. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll call on Brady Collins.
Thank you. I've gotten worse than Brady before, so don't worry. My name is Brady Collins. I am the Policy and Research Manager at Kiwa, and I'll be brief. Again, we urge LACERA to submit a letter to Koei demanding that they recognize the union. We understand why LACERA invests in Koei. They have a very strong ESG rating, but ESG ratings, unless companies are held accountable, are basically meaningless. A small anecdote, during the pandemic, my wife and I had 2 kids, and we were very fortunate enough to purchase a home in Los Angeles. Doing those things makes you worry about money. And so what did we do? We got a financial planner, a nice guy out in Santa Monica. And because we care about the environment, we care about workers' rights, I asked him, can you send us a list of companies that have strong ESG ratings, because we want to make the right decisions in terms of how we save our money. And because I do corporate research for a living, I thought I should just take a deeper look at some of the companies on that list. And it's shocking how many of them do not deserve that label. And so ESG is at face value something that is important. Companies should do the right thing and how they treat their workers and be conscious of how they are treating the environment. But it is a marketing strategy for companies. They attract investment by releasing annual sustainability reports that are written by professionals that know how to boast about ESG standards. But unless we hold them accountable, they are meaningless. And so I think it is our responsibility to hold a company like Koei accountable. And that's what we're asking for your partnership in doing. And we think they'll listen to you. Koei, their strongest growth as a multinational is here in the US. And why is that? It's because they've been able to cut labor costs. And we know what that means, cutting labor costs. Hotel workers from Unite Here, the members of SEIU that work in the city, SAG-AFTRA, WGA, they all know what cutting labor costs really means. So again, we urge you to work with us, communicate your concerns to Koei. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the last speaker.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
When they presented, when some of the public commenters spoke last month, I spoke with staff, and I know our staff is already in communication with some of the public commenters. Mm-hmm. But can we make sure staff talks to them again today?
They are in.
Yeah. Just wanted to.
Yeah, we actually discussed this yesterday.
For the record, yeah. Mm-hmm.
for the record. Thanks. Okay, moving on to the executive update, the Chief Investment Officer's report. Mr. Grable.
Good morning, Madam Chair, trustees. Thank you, Deb, for driving slides today. There's several new features in the monthly report that I'll highlight, and we'll begin on slide 4, please. With the market environment, this slide shows the capital markets through the end of July. As you can see on this slide, that our new fiscal year began with strong performance across equity markets, real estate, and natural resources. When you look, month to date or 1 month, close to 4% for the global equity markets, that's an environment where it's very easy for an investor to really deploy capital. You've got the wind to your back. Calendar year to date, global equity markets are up 17%. And equities, as we know, are the main component of most institutional portfolios. So that really creates a strong backdrop. However, and maybe I'll say however twice, or maybe 3 times, however, our job is much more complex. It's more complex than just looking in the rear view mirror and then allocating to what has worked, especially what has worked well beyond expectations. And the journey, if we look at, once again, for the upper left, the MSCI ACWI IMI, which is our global equity benchmark, year to date, it's up 17.6%. That journey is not a straight line. And when you look at the returns for the 1, 3, 5, and 10-year periods, the annualized returns are all different. And basically what that means is it's not been a straight line, that there are periods when equities has performed well, and dependent upon the measuring period, there includes periods when it hasn't worked well. And that really is the challenge, we'll discuss later on this morning in our strategic asset allocation. The second discussion that Makita will lead, that markets perform differently in different time periods. And what we have to do is put together a portfolio that recognizes that it's not just one asset category in one time period, but it's multiple asset categories across all time periods. And as a mature pension, we acknowledge in our investment beliefs that the sequence of returns matters, that losses need to be mitigated because losing money has a tremendous cost to us. And as we look at different asset categories, different asset allocations, that our mission to produce, protect, and provide promised benefits really is predicated upon understanding that it's not just, equity markets are up 17.6% year to date or 10-year annualized 8.5%, but there's different interplays between different asset categories. And once again, it's more than just returns. We have to ask questions about how do our different portfolios perform under different stress scenarios? Are we being adequately compensated for the risks? Are we, does the benchmark manifest itself? Are there distinct roles in our functional framework? And that's something I know we discussed during the credit committee, specifically about emerging market debt. But there's a lot of information on this slide, and most of it's good news, but within that, there's a lot of mixed news. And from this, hopefully we construct, an ever improving portfolio. If we can turn to slide 6. Slide 6 in the bottom right, if I can draw your attention, that is a new chart. Last month, Mr. Kelly made a comment about that we should focus on the federal debt. And maybe that was a timely comment, given that Fitch downgraded the U.S. since, over the intervening 30 days. And we added this chart, thanks to Daniel for helping identify one that was, is responsive to the request from a trustee. What this chart shows is total U.S. debt, U.S. GDP, and the ratio of debt to GDP. What is not on this chart is that the US debt is reflected throughout our portfolio. We have a substantial amount invested in US government bonds. We heard about that once again during the committee meeting this morning. The US dollar is the most prevalent currency in our portfolio. Once again, that's a function of US debt, US credit ratings, and our portfolio is more exposed to the US economy than any other country. And later on, we'll discuss slide 14, and what slide 14 will show us is that over 70%, we could stay on slide 6. Sorry for the head fake, Deb. That 70% of our portfolio is US domiciled. So they're really, this chart is almost implicit in every investment, every allocation decision that is made by the board. Now, if we could turn to slide 9. Slide 9 shows the results for the pension through the end of June, which is the end of our fiscal year. As we can see, the pension had a strong June, up 2.3% net for the month. AUM, or total market value, is $73.6 billion. Cash at a very comfortable $1.1 billion, which is more than 3 months of benefit payments. On the right, we always show our functional allocation, which really is spot on target in our 5 functional asset categories. Turning to the next page, we can see the results for the fiscal year for both the pension and the OPEB trust. And maybe something I'll start doing every month is we finish the fiscal year with $76.7 billion for the pension and OPEB. We often talk about, or I talk about, the pension and OPEB separately, but it's the same group, around this horseshoe in this room that oversees both. So, it's close to $77 billion is what we finished the year at in terms of what we, which is within our fiduciary remit. The pension finished the fiscal year with a return of 6.4%. We could see that in the top box. The benchmark returned 5% for the year, so that's nice outperformance. We can also, this table or chart also shows our annualized numbers for the 3, 5, and 10-year numbers. We're ahead of our benchmark, our custom benchmark over those time periods, as well as our actuarial targets, which may be the most important benchmark because that really governs how we allocate assets. So over the last decade plus, the portfolio is working well, but also working efficiently, and that's really important. Growth and credit were their 2 best performing categories from a return perspective. Over the last year, we discussed obviously credit in great detail in the 8 o'clock hour. Real assets and risk mitigation, did their jobs over these time periods. There wasn't autocorrelation, and that's something that we expect of a broadly diversified portfolio. OPEB finished the fiscal year at $3.1 billion. $3.1 billion, as we've been discussing, is a material pool of capital. We manage it as such. OPEB was up 9.3% net for the fiscal year. Liquid markets drove the 1-year performance for OPEB when you compare OPEB to the pension. However, if you look at the longer time periods, OPEB has underperformed, and really it's a difference in asset allocation and implementation, where OPEB has more in public equities and more in liquid assets. And that really is a differential that really drives home, what we say when asset allocation is the biggest determinant of results. If we can turn to slide 14.
Mr. Grable, before you leave that slide, something to think about maybe in the future, not on this slide, but something to add. We have been ahead of trend, without a doubt. And, of course, that shows up as we've banked really great performance over the last decade, and we're ahead of our actuarial target. And so the question that I think is worth asking and maybe having an answer to in future slide presentations is how much pain can we tolerate and still meet our actuarial target? Because I think it is important to understand a downturn could happen at any point for various reasons. And it would be nice to know, to have a sense of how much pain we can tolerate and for how long before we're digging ourselves out of a hole, because right now we've made a mountain, right? So we can withstand a little bit of pain, and that's part of how we've designed the portfolio. Of course, we're going to have those ups and downs throughout I think that might be an interesting kind of thing to think about, and we can discuss it further at another time, but I'm just kind of tossing that out.
And Madam Chair, I believe that we do that in the quarterly performance book. We have a whole risk section in that uses the data from MSCI and stresses the portfolio. And so there are a variety of stress scenarios that we run the whole portfolio through, and we do that on a quarterly basis. But it's something we can draw attention to.
It's actually, it's not a stress test per se. I'm simply asking for a mathematical calculation, which is what negative number can we kind of experience over a period of time and still get our number. It's a simple equation, and that number will change over time as we book more returns or as those returns go down, right? The stress tests tell us if we're going to get beyond that number. Mm-hmm. So I'm not looking for a stress test. I'm looking for a simple bit of algebra.
Okay.
Thanks.
And if we could turn to slide 14. Slide 14, these are comments that I added this morning, given that they're in some senses developing news. And the developing news relates to an executive order that's expected today. And that executive order is expected to be that US private equity and venture capital firms may be banned from making direct investments in Chinese technology companies. The focus of the executive order is on 3 industries: semiconductors, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence. Beyond the headlines, I have no insight. That obviously we abide by all regulations and all laws. That this, in many ways, is indirect exposure for us, in that it's the GPs that we back that are the ones that make investments in those industries and in that geography. But the reason why I mentioned that in this slide is that our exposure to companies domiciled in China is 2%. Where in the light green, kind of in the middle on the right, it says CHN, which is 2%. Just to put that in comparison, or to put some context around that, and maybe this is comparing apples to bananas, but the ACWI IMI benchmark, or global equity benchmark, the exposure in that benchmark to China is about 3.25%. So that puts into perspective where that's our largest asset category, and that ballpark is the type of exposure to China. So we're probably underweight China from a benchmark perspective. As it relates to how this will impact us, it's probably prospective, but I just wanted to advise the board as to developments. We'll keep this in the monthly CIO report as to any potential developments and how it potentially impacts our portfolio. But I think that it's something for all of us to be mindful, given that this seems to, in this era where there is not that much bipartisanship, that really is a bipartisan issue. The last thing I'll mention is on slide 20.
Before you leave that topic, so there's the issue of direct exposure, and then there's the issue of indirect exposure, meaning that we have investments, LP investments in GPs that may have to liquidate other segments of the portfolio that may not affect us directly. Do you think, and have you done the analysis of how much that could create problems for the GPs themselves, cash flow wise, in terms of having to sell things on the secondary market and put any pressure on our portfolio? Do you see any bleed over effects as of yet, as you're thinking about it?
My Madam Chair, my operating assumption is that it would be prospective. I think that, but once again, I don't know, and that's just, speculation on my part. To the extent that it is forced divestment, then it would be a hit to those GPs because they would be forced sellers. But I think it may be prospective as opposed to retroactive.
Got it.
I
Thank
don't
you.
know.
We'll hang on the outcome of that then.
On slide 20, we added at the bottom a new metric on the bottom right, and this is meetings with external parties. And this is really a work in progress. It's something I want to refine because I think the number understates the actual number of meetings. I'll say that at the beginning. The number is, distinct meetings. For example, if there are 5 LACERA people in a meeting, that's not 5 meetings. It's 1 meeting. The meeting is, I'm not trying to market or spin. It's, trying to count in an effective way. These meetings may be in person or via, video, Zoom, or Teams. May be an existing or a prospective partner. It excludes meetings, by our agents to the extent our consultants or emerging manager partners have meetings. That's not included in this. This also excludes our meetings with those same agents because we meet with them, maybe daily. But once again, I want to sharpen this over time. I think that this is an undercount, but the reason for the inclusion is that the team is very busy. I know that all of us have inbound requests for meetings. We have lots of meetings. We meet with lots of parties. Busy also may not be the right metric. I think that we're focused on being really productive, and productivity is a better metric. And one way that this board will hear about enhanced productivity is the discussion that's planned for later this morning about our internal investment committees. But the reason, once again, for this is to provide some insight into the scale and scope of our operations. And with that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to pause for questions.
Any questions?
Yes.
Mr. Santos. Mr. Jones and then Mr. Santos.
Thanks, John. Question for you. So I know we've had a little bit of conversation as board members as we go out to different conferences and encounter prospective managers who, of course, are interested in doing that. Do we have an official kind of CRM system where we're able to measure the contacts that we have and kind of track where they are? I mean, do we have some visibility into, as you talk about the staff, trying to get some idea of, well, how much of the staff's relative time is spent just in the initial meeting, vetting, categorizing, assigning, what have you? Because I'm still trying to get a little better sense of how we prospectively take in new contacts, and then what is the established process for how we nurture or this one goes into this bin and this one goes into that bin. Do we have any technology that kind of helps us to do that? Or please don't tell me we're still using Excel or
Mr. Jones, we do not have a CRM system. It's something that is part of, I think it's something that came out of which will be in front of the audit committee later this month, came out of the ODD analysis. But I know that recommendation's been around for better part of a decade at this point.
Okay.
I think it goes back to a PE internal audit that was done in 2014. It's something that we're looking to implement. Hopefully it's something that we do. We're consistently, I think we had a discussion last year about how we've increased the use of technology across the investment division to be better stewards of capital. There's an RFP discussion later this morning about further enhancing that. It's something that we will look into in order to provide, greater kind of apportionment and insight. I think the main takeaway for all of us to recognize is if there are tens of thousands of asset managers out there, LACERA may do business with a couple hundred. And every year we may add, maybe 10. So for every 100 contacts that we have, it's the likely outcome is not yet.
Yeah.
Just because there are more good firms out there than we have capital.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, we're certainly thinking about how we take in intake from opportunities. So that's something that we'll be talking about probably at the offsite. Yeah. Mr. Santos?
Yes, thank you. So the 2% China exposure, what is that, 1.5 billion? Would that be correct, Mr. Perez? You're the numbers guy. Sorry, pick on you.
Sure.
So it's 1.5 billion out of, what do we say, 77 billion? So small. And thank you for that information, because I have been really concerned about investments in China for many years. And I know China, all the reporting saying it's slowing down substantially. So perhaps we did the right thing a couple of years ago. But anyway, the other question that I have is, I believe you said 74% of the portfolio, of LACERA's portfolio, is invested in the United States. Did I hear that correctly?
Mr. Santos, over 70%.
70%. So many years ago, this board made a conscious decision to eliminate home country bias. But with the over 70%, did we abandon that idea to do away with the home country bias?
Mr. Santos, it's driven by our benchmarks. To the extent we are, there is no home country bias. For example, we have no distinct allocation to U.S. equities. We have an allocation to global equities, and the global equity benchmark is probably near 60% allocated to U.S. equities. To the extent the board has an allocation to long treasury bonds, well, that's going to be in the U.S. To the extent we have investment grade credit, that benchmark is the U.S. So it's really driven by the benchmarks identified by the board. But as we implement discrete asset categories, there is no affirmative statement as it relates to only U.S. or ex-U.S. It's really, and it's something that is analyzed within the various structure reviews as well.
Okay. And the last comment is with regards to the 174 investment meetings by the staff only. And all that is despite the fact that we have a lot of vacancies in the investment staff. So this is commendable that the staff managed to conduct 174 meetings. I wondered what the number would look like if we were with 100% staff. So it's something for us to think about. It is the opportunity cost, and I always, we always hold the staff accountable for what they do, but we kind of forget that from my perspective, from where I sit here, you do double work because you're on the staff. So it's something to be proud of, but at the same time, I asked the management, the CEO in particular, to please continue your efforts to get us up to 100% staffing, or at least 90% staffing notwithstanding the environment that we find ourselves in, where not many people are willing to work for the little salary that we provide, because we cannot even compete with the industry. So something to keep in mind, and I'd be looking forward to some discussion, hopefully at the Offsite or somewhere, with regards to the salary study that the LACERA management has obtained, because it's really important that we keep that in mind, so that way we can make adjustments to the staff salary. Thank you.
Just one additional point of clarification. The 174 meetings are with existing managers, or does that also include prospective?
Yes, the latter.
Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Fila, did you want to add something, or did you take yourself off?
I did take myself off, but if I may, just
Yes.
one thing on the salary study and some of that conversation. We have had some conversations with LACERA in regards to that, and I know we have the ongoing governance review. We're going to be talking about various different investment models. Some of that decision-making on governance model ultimately probably plays into future state of what salary expectations may be. So I think the time may be better spent on that after the governance discussion, if that makes sense to you.
Okay.
Totally.
Because if there's a big change, then you're just going to have to redouble those efforts.
Okay. Thank you for that. All right. Any further comments, Mr. Grable? Great. Then we'll move on to our member spotlight, Mr. Popowich.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Sanchez, and good morning, trustees. Each month, we recognize and highlight one of our members to both thank them for their service and to remind us why we do what we do, to provide for our members who have already given so much to the constituents of LA County and making LA County a better place to live for all of us. So this month, we recognize Steve Powell. And if you'll go to the next slide. Mr. Powell is a rescue boat captain for the LA County Fire Department. He has spent many of his years reaching out and helping people when they're in their worst situations. And so we thank him for doing that. He has been working since he was 16 years old, and this is the first time he will be not working, as he's going to be retired after 36 years of service, which is a tremendous number of years of service. And this seems to be a trend for most of our retirees that we recognize here. His key thing to do going forward is traveling. He's got 100 places he wants to go see. So he's going to have himself a good time, we hope. So thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Powell.
Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Powell, indeed. This is still my favorite part of the presentation. Thank you. All right, moving on to the Chief Executive Officer's report, Mr. Kryman.
Yes, thank you, Chair Sanchez, trustees. Good morning. Just a quick report from myself. So the elections for the Board of Investments the voting started on August 4th. We've confirmed that the majority of the active members have received credentials to vote electronically. They've been provided the credentials at their place of employment, their emails at work, and then those that have emails that are home addresses or home emails have also been sent. We've also confirmed that our retirees have received their mail-in ballots as well as the credentials. We've received one call to our Member Services Center about the elections, which is a very different outcome than we had the last couple of elections that I've been involved with. And so we're pleased with the vendor. Quite frankly, has done a much better job this time around. Our communication staff have been very instrumental in making sure that all of the active employees and retired members have been notified about the election. I believe we're sending a reminder notification on the 16th of August to both active and retired retirees to make sure that they vote. Voting will end August 31st, and we anticipate that the Board of Supervisors will certify the election somewhere around October. And so that's the status on the election.
Quick question, Madam Chair,
Yes,
on that
Mr.
item.
Rhodes.
I noticed when I was going through the election materials that one candidate didn't have a candidate statement. Are those required? Or I saw that candidate had put out information as far as marketing materials for the election, but not a candidate statement.
We don't handle the posting.
The EO does that?
Yes, the
Okay.
executive office. I'm not sure if it's a requirement, maybe.
My understanding is it's not, it's optional. They can do it if they wish, if not.
It says may
Oh, okay.
provide.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always thought that they should, and that there should be some standard template for those. But that's just a comment. Thank you.
Advice on how to get elected.
Advice on how to provide interesting, consistent information.
Right.
Okay.
In terms of the recruitment, I appreciate your comments once again. We have been making steady progress in terms of trying to bring people on board. We were successful in hiring a deputy CIO. There were 4 FA2s that have been hired. And we've designated a recruiter in the HR section to work exclusively on, to work with Mr. Perez and Mr. Grable and his team to get the other exams out. And so we have a dedicated resource for them, internal. We're also continuing our efforts with our outside recruiters that are working on trying to get some additional candidates into the pool so that we can begin interviewing. There was one specific PIO, I believe there was a promotional exam that just closed. And so we're looking forward to those particular interviews and Mr. Grable and his team making a selection for that particular position. I know that there's a report that Mr. Rice has put together later on that will talk a little bit about the recruitment efforts on the legal side, both for the benefits side and as well as the investment side. And so I'll leave it to Mr. Rice to make that presentation to you all and some of the external resources that we had to go out and acquire in order for us to support Mr. Grable and his team moving forward, as well as our benefits section, who's just Fern Billingsley is retiring, and so we have definitely a major hole that we have to fill on our benefits side, and so we're completing some of the selection interviews. I think they've been completed, and so we're hopeful to make an offer and a selection very soon on the benefits side.
Great.
So with that, I'd be more than happy to stand for questions if you have any questions.
Okay, Mr. Jones.
Yeah, just Mr. Kryman, just a thought through there. I just appreciate it. I see that because I've been tracking it among all the other needs in the investment group, but I see with the real estate that you've got the senior director or senior investment officer and financial analyst in that group on the radar, I guess officially on the radar screen with the recruiters. So I appreciate that.
Yes.
Okay, any further questions? All right, thanks.
Just a quick comment, if I may.
Mr. Santos.
Regarding the election, please vote.
Yes.
Very important. You have the ability to select which is right here. So please vote. If you want a recommendation, see me on the break. I'm more than happy to do that. And I'm not running, so.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Santos. Appreciate that public service comment. All right, any other comments? Thank you, Mr. Kryman. Keep up the good work, and hopefully we will continue to close this gap. All right, moving on to the consent items. Do we have a motion?
Move approval.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Thank you. All right. Cast your vote.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Excellent. Okay. Moving on to our, oops. Non-consent items. So we have one RFP for a private market analytics platform that is being presented by Mr. Johnson. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, it's being presented by Mr. Johnson, Mr. Kim, and Miss, how do I say that? Janoyan? Guinean. I was totally off on that. Apologies. All right. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. I'm
Great.
just trying to see if this slide transition works. All right. Thanks a lot. All right. Good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees. So the item before you is a recommendation to launch an RFP for a private market analytics platform provider. And the proposed search is intended to enhance our data transparency, portfolio monitoring, and ESG analytics across our private market investments. And just a reminder that MSCI's Borrow One is currently LACERA's multi-asset class risk system. So by bolting on a specialized private markets analytics platform, we believe this combination will offer us more detailed and accurate snapshot of our private market exposures by feeding company level data into our risk system. In addition, the secondary platform could be leveraged as an independent source for additional accounting and performance checks, as well as benchmarking and universe analytics. So if the search is approved, we anticipate the discussed enhancements to be applied across both plans. On this slide, we illustrate the board-approved private market target allocations for the total fund at the top and the OPEB master trust at the bottom. For some history, trustees approved a private market target allocation for the OPEB master trust during the June 2021 Board of Investments meeting. So the proposed search will primarily advance 3 strategic initiatives: enhancing operational effectiveness, further optimizing our investment model, and maximizing LACERA's stewardship and ownership rights within our private market programs. So through this search, we'll be seeking to achieve meaningful enhancements specifically in our investment, operational, and reporting processes that will further enrich LACERA's investment oversight and decisions. To successfully achieve and implement these enhancements, we're going to be asking interested vendors to provide 2 broad services. So 1, data collection and integration, 2, monitoring and reporting services. Within data collection and integration, the platforms will be required to continuously collect and deliver fundamental data, as well as detailed metrics on our portfolio companies within LACERA's private market funds. And for monitoring and reporting services, platforms will be required to provide tools that will assist LACERA to better understand, manage, and report on our private market portfolios. And lastly, the selected provider will need to demonstrate fit by providing solutions that align with LACERA's policies and strategic initiatives. I'll now hand it over to my colleague Dale to provide some additional commentary on the ESG services component.
Hey, John, quick question. If I could, before you go there, I noticed here, and it may just be implied rather than being explicit, but I don't see an ask per se for kind of AI capability. And since that seems to be the edge of where, Gene and I were just at PPI, there's a very significant piece on it as it relates to finance. So again, it may be implied here rather than being explicit, but is that part of your thinking in terms of when you're looking at these vendors, is the ability to leverage some component of AI in for the benefit of the staff or so?
Trustee Jones, thanks for the question. So we did collaborate with the systems division, just kind of around data security and also enhancements in advanced technology. And one of the topics that did come up was AI.
Approach yet in terms of how you all are thinking about it, or is it still a little?
Yeah, we did receive a set of suggested questions to include in the RFP document from the systems division. So we're kind of scanning that through. One of those set of questions could be around AI and kind of advanced technology and the future of the industry around data kind of management and analytics.
Cool.
All right. Thank you, John. Good morning, Chair and trustees. As noted on the previous slide, this search will further our efforts towards one of LACERA's strategic initiatives,
to maximize stewardship and ownership rights. For the last 6 years, LACERA has endeavored to evaluate the extent to which all of our investment managers integrate ESG into the investment process. And this is reflected in the ESG integration pillar of the manager's scorecard, which is reported to the board in the quarterly performance book. Furthermore, we seek to identify relevant financially material factors that may impact the value of our investments as well as our total fund, including climate-related impacts. From the risk analytics search in 2019, LACERA with board approval hired MSCI, Sustainalytics, and TrueCost to provide ESG and climate data for our public market assets. Currently, those three tools provide ESG and climate data on our public markets portfolio, which is approximately half of the fund. And we do have some additional insight and data from GRESB, the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, on our real estate portfolio. And while we are currently modeling climate data for some of our private assets and private portfolios, where the investment manager has provided data points, this is a very labor-intensive process and it's fairly rudimentary. The selection of a private markets analytics platform for the collection of private markets ESG data, metrics, and key performance indicators provided directly by the investment managers would allow for deeper insight into ESG-related exposures, such as the energy transition, across all of LACERA's portfolio, not just public markets, for a holistic total fund view. The private markets ESG data would complement our qualitative upfront and ongoing due diligence of ESG integration across all mandates and provide us with data to evaluate ESG-related factors and conduct scenario across the entire fund. That concludes my comments. I'll pass it to Sanaya for the rest of the presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Dale. Good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees. On this slide, we have outlined the proposed RFP's minimum qualifications which responding firms must meet in order to qualify. The service provider must have at least 5 years of experience providing private market analytics system to institutional investors with assets in excess of 5 billion. We expect them to cover all of LACERA's private market asset types in terms of performance, measurement, portfolio monitoring, and reporting, and have capabilities to collect and deliver ESG data. For the firms that meet the minimum qualifications, we have designed 5 categories of evaluation. For the specific search beyond organization, professional, staff, and fees, I'll highlight that we have a category for operational processes, portfolio monitoring, and ESG and climate analytics. The weights for the categories are included on the slide for your reference. The overall evaluation process will take place in 2 phases and will include members of portfolio analytics, private equity, corporate governance, illiquid credit, and real assets. The evaluation of written responses will be conducted in phase 1, followed by candidate interviews in phase 2. And RFP selection will be made by the Board of Investments. And on the next slide, I will discuss the timeline for the proposed search. Here we illustrate the estimated timeline for the search. If approved today, we anticipate posting the RFP materials in the following week, and we will come back to the board with a detailed recommendation in the 4th quarter of 2023. And in conclusion, today, staff is recommending the approval of the proposed search criteria for private market analytics platform, which is included in the current board-approved budget. But thank you for your time, and we're opening the floor to any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Santos.
Yes, thank you. So for the what's the cost associated for provider that meets this requirements? What are we looking at?
Trustee Santos, thanks for the question. So we have kind of surveyed the landscape of providers. I would say that it's pretty competitive. Our goal more is to have a net savings once the system is implemented. There is one provider where we do have a kind of a basic limited subscription package, and we're kind of going off of the information that we've received from them over the years, over the relationship, and we'll kind of use that as a benchmark when we receive proposals from other vendors, if it's on the high end, the low end for that price, for the fees.
But do we have any idea, like the dollar
Yes.
amount?
Yeah, ballpark, it's going to be roughly over about 100,000 per year.
All right, and second, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Second question is Makita, the consultant, going to be part of the evaluation group?
Formally, they're not part of the evaluation team, given just kind of the current size of the evaluation team, where it's a division, a cross-division team review, but we will be bringing Makita and inviting them for all the interviews, our internal meetings and discussions and scoring.
Good, thank you for that. So I move that we approve this RFP that with a cost not to exceed 150 million.
Thousand.
150,000.
That's a big technology system.
We used to talk in billions. So 150,000. And also my motion to include that the CIO will have the authority to hire the finalists, and of course with the usual report to this board on all aspects of the process. That's my motion.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second, we have comments by Mr. Knox and Mr. Green.
Thank you. When you do the interviews, does that include a demo of the system and the services?
Absolutely, and given if the scheduling works out for this RFP, we plan to do an on-site as well.
Are those ever scored, the demos? Or?
Yes, so we want to see the usability, the user friendliness, if it does do what the system and the team is marketing to us. And then based on our existing relationships with our custodial bank and our current risk system with MSCI, kind of the synergy and the compatibility of those systems, that will play a key factor as well, because that ultimately kind of generates our quarterly reporting to the board.
Where is that captured in the evaluation criteria? Operational process?
It will be in the portfolio monitoring and reporting. So kind of both of 2 and 3. So the operational process will be the data piping, and then the reporting, if it has compatibility to kind of supplement or add on to our existing quarterly board reporting.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Pettis, did you want to make a comment now?
Yeah, Trustee Sanchez and then Trustee Santos, the one thing I do want the board to consider is the budgetary constraint on the recommendation. While I think 150,000 may be adequate, it may not, depending on what prices. Last time we did get research on this was about 6, 7, 8 months ago. As you know, everything has been inflated. We did budget for more than 150,000 for this project. So that's just one caveat I
So
do.
you have an approved budget that you
Yes,
can work within. Can we
yes.
work within the approved budget?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so we have an amendment then.
Yeah.
You accept your own amendment, Mr.
Yes.
Knox? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm in full support of this. You know, in the private market, it's mostly self-reporting, right? And you know, what if it's false information? You know, it needs to be vetted. You know, we heard public comment today about you know, concerns with an employer that hasn't a high rating, but you know, what metric are they using? I think this is crucial to vet out some of these companies. The New York City, bear with me, I made a note, but the Stern Center for Sustainable Business reports exponential growth is due in large part to increasing evidence that a business strategy focused on material ESG issues is synonymous with high quality management and management teams and improved returns. So I'm in support of the motion within the budgetary stuff, and you know, have at it. Hopefully we get a very good and thorough company that can you know, weed out the all non-hackers, as they say, and the liars, quite frankly. We want accurate information.
Great.
So-
Yeah, that is a technical mandate. Have at it. Thank you. Mr. Root?
Thank you. I'm also in support. Just quick question. In your timeline, you have RFP launch, I guess, this month after this board meeting, once we approve it. It looks like it's about a month for the RFP for responses to come back. Is that enough? Well, I mean, whatever. I mean, I know you don't have the exact dates here, but is that enough time to get the word out and get a appropriate response?
Yeah, so if approved, we'll be immediately posting the RFP documents on LACERA's website. And we're trying to move this expeditiously just because we kind of want to get all of the technology and the analytics onboarded. So our tentative timeline that will be posted is that we're going to select a finalist sometime in October and November with an update memo to the board in December, possibly.
So the responders, they have 30 days or?
Yeah, so they have roughly about 30 days to ask any questions, clarification questions on the RFP questionnaire to staff. They also will need to submit a letter of intent or intent to respond. And then at like around the 30-day mark, they'll be submitting their formal proposal responses to our questionnaire.
And that's enough time?
Yes, we think so. The questionnaire, we kind of trimmed it down to roughly to a manageable amount because we feel where we can kind of dig into the candidates and do our own kind of diligence is during the interview process.
Okay. So the application's, I don't want to say light, but a little bit more streamlined.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Mr. Kim, how big is the universe?
Yeah. So before we kind of put this RFP train in motion, we did kind of survey the landscape and we've identified 11. Now there's obviously vendors that we could possibly not identify because they may be on the smaller scale, kind of like beginning stages of a technology firm. So we're probably anticipating shooting for 11. It could possibly be half of that if they don't respond, but the universe that we've identified is at around that range.
Okay, great. Ms. Jones?
Thank you. First, I just wanted to share that thank you for the presentation on the ESG portion as well. I definitely am happy that we're keeping that in the, in the conversation as we go through RFP processes. But my question was the involvement with Makita. Is it going to be ever anything formally presented by Makita in writing, or is it just an informal participation? What extent would they be involved with the RFP process?
Through the chair, Trustee Jones, anytime we do any type of RFP, if it's for software or service or any other mandate, we usually have Makita participate, at least being an observer. And then as you see through the materials, we usually do ask that they write a concurrence memo. And so that should be part of this process as well.
Okay, awesome, very good. And then finally, when I first raised my hand, it was because my question was about the limit of the 150 and whether that was right, where we're going to stick. So I understand now, we'll just do within budget. So you have that leeway. That's it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. You may vote. Yeses.
Me too.
Progress. This is called progress.
Mr. Jones, are you yes?
Yes.
Okay.
He just wants to say aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, super. So that concludes the non-consent items. So we're going to go to the reports, but let's go ahead and take a 15-minute break right now. 16 minutes rounded up to the to 50. So at 10:50, we'll resume with the reports. Thanks.
Recording stopped.
Thank you. It's 10:50, so let's go ahead and continue with the remainder of the agenda. So we're on to item 10, reports. So we have 3 items that have presentations and the rest that are for information only. Do we have any requests to pull any of those information only memos? Or
You mean the ones in the executive session?
D and on? No. Okay. Okay, great. So then we'll go ahead and hear the first presentation, which is the internal investment committees and due diligence presentation.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and trustees. Every investment recommendation that comes before the board is the result of an iterative diligence and discussion process by investment staff. Our goal for this presentation today is to provide the board with more visibility into staff's internal committee and due diligence processes of what happens before an investment makes it to the board, as well as an update on the team's efforts in recent months to further strengthen and enhance these processes. LACERA's portfolio has grown more complex over the years in order to accomplish our mission to produce, protect, and provide the promised benefits to our members. The board's objectives are set out in our investment policy statement, our investment beliefs, and our asset class structure reviews. And as stated under the investment policy statement, staff is responsible for implementing the policies and programs established by the board. In order for staff to effectively and consistently implement the board's objectives, it is vital that we have strong foundation and processes in place. Late last year, a working group was formed to review the investment division's internal committee processes and due diligence procedures. The working group consisted of representatives from all of the asset classes, including myself from private equity, Cindy Rivera from real estate, Krista Powell from risk mitigation and credit, Ron Secundua from global equities, and Noah Damsky from real assets. The working group started by first gathering perspectives. We gathered input from members of our respective asset classes, and the group compared and contrasted the different structures of the internal committees, as well as the methods of diligence and analysis. Throughout the process, the group had iterative internal discussions. We identified areas of strengths and weaknesses, and sought ways to standardize and bring consistency to our internal committees and due diligence procedures. The group evaluated industry best practices by having conversations and meetings with peers outside of LACERA, including with our consultants, our asset managers, and other institutional investors. We then set out to establish goals and a framework for the project. In doing so, we defined the role and purpose of our internal committees and built a cohesive framework around diligence. We then looked for ways to refine our analysis and materials. And in that process, we looked at the materials that each team uses in evaluating investment opportunities, further standardized the analytical spreadsheets, materials, and due diligence procedures across the division, and also established consistent principles and procedures across asset categories. These processes and principles are documented in our guiding documents so that expectations are clear and consistent across the division. This has been a true team effort across the entire division. However, we note that our efforts are iterative and ongoing, and as we gather more feedback and as LACERA's portfolio continues to evolve, we recognize that there will always be room for improvement, and the team will continue to seek out ways to strengthen our internal processes. Our internal investment committees are organized by asset category. The Growth Team Investment Committee consists of internal staff from the private equity and global equity teams. The Real Asset Team Investment Committee consists of staff from real assets and real estate, and the Risk Mitigation and Credit Committee consists of staff from hedge funds, fixed income, and credit. These committees work with members of our corporate governance team and our portfolio analytics team in order to advance investments that are consistent with the objectives of the structure reviews and the board-approved strategic initiatives. Before an investment is approved by the CIO to be advanced to the board, investment recommendations generally obtain the approval of the internal committees. The committee meetings are regularly scheduled, and they are an opportunity to gather input from our colleagues with different perspectives, experience, expertise, and points of view. Discussions at the committee level are fulsome and multifaceted. Our efforts to strengthen our internal processes are rooted in the premise that a strong foundation for these processes will deliver improved investment outcomes in order to accomplish our mission. Comprehensive internal processes needed to include dialogue and collaboration so that teams can have multidimensional discussions and come to a better collective judgment that combine the subject matter and functional expertise across our division. that our discussions needed to have consistency so that the teams can effectively communicate their analysis and objectively compare the merits and risks of each opportunity. That analysis should be comprehensive and robust across asset categories so that the team can have a high level of conviction in the recommendations that it advances. And we need to continuously evaluate and share best practices so that there is ongoing improvement. This slide illustrates the internal committee and due diligence steps for a typical private market investment. At the initial evaluation stage, staff has several introductory meetings with the manager. If staff decides that they would like to proceed to comprehensive diligence, they must first provide the asset class principal investment officer with a set of pre-due diligence materials, which will evaluate at a high level whether the investment advances the objectives of the structure reviews in terms of strategy, geography, performance, operational, and organizational merits and risks. If the asset class PIO approves the investment for further diligence, then staff will start the comprehensive due diligence process. And in a later slide, Cindy will go over in a bit more detail the topics that are covered in the due diligence process for every investment. Staff will also engage the asset class consultant to initiate their independent due diligence process. But it's important to note that the diligence conducted by our consultant is a separate and autonomous process from staff. And while staff will confer with our consultant throughout the diligence process, staff is accountable for every stage of that diligence. And only after the internal committees have approved the investment does the investment go to the CIO for his review and approval. And once the CIO has approved, the recommendation is then made to the board for approval. Post-investment, staff monitors the investment during our whole period, including by participating in manager and advisory board meetings, through quarterly and annual compliance checks by using various tools such as our ESG and DEI DDQs, our quarterly performance reviews, and our manager's scorecards. This slide illustrates our process with a typical public markets investments. Public market investments generally follow the RFP process. There is an evaluation team consisting of staff, and that team will define the RFP parameters and recommend the parameters to the board for approval. Each team member separately scores RFP responses using a standard score sheet. The scores are then tallied and discussed among the evaluation team in order to determine which manager will advance. During later rounds of diligence, in-house interviews are conducted with the firms that have advanced, and on-site visits are conducted as appropriate, as well as reference calls. The consultant is engaged to initiate independent due diligence as well. And just as with private market investments, that is a separate and autonomous diligence process from staff. Before a recommendation is made to the board, the evaluation team would discuss the RFP progress and recommendation with the internal committees. And once the evaluation team has arrived at its recommendation, the recommendation is made to the CIO, then advanced to the board. And as with private market investments, the staff continuously monitor our public market investments using similar tools. Next, I'll pass it on to Cindy, who will discuss our guiding documents.
Thank you, Cheryl, and good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees. This slide is an overview of the investment office's due diligence guiding documents, which help establish a baseline of due diligence operations aligned with industry best practices and implement the objectives of LACERA's investment program. These objectives are described in LACERA's board-approved documents, namely the LACERA investment policy statement, inclusive of investment beliefs, and asset category structure reviews. To achieve these objectives, LACERA must diligently evaluate and monitor its prospective and existing investments. On the left half of this slide, we represent an overarching document describing the goals and principles that help guide the investment office's internal committee and due diligence practices. This document also helps establish underwriting fundamentals consistency across asset categories. On the right half of this slide, we represent the functional asset class specific documents that show each internal committee also has its own governance document. This considers the nuances of differing underlying assets, investment strategies, structures, and risk profiles. Additionally, operational due diligence is an ongoing component of due diligence. The investment office's pre- and post-investment ODD procedures provide detailed processes for public and private market teams. It is important to note ODD is performed alongside staff's investment due diligence. While both IDD and ODD are identified as standalone procedures, Diligence results can be evaluated holistically throughout staff's comprehensive due diligence process. On slide 8, we view the elements covered in internal committee governance documents. Let's discuss these clockwise. On committee and voting structure, everyone has a vote and no one member can push an investment through final internal approval. Long before investment recommendations make it to a Board of Investments meeting for trustees' consideration, potential investments are vetted through the IC's voting structure. Some matters, such as private market investment recommendations, are considered action items that must be voted on, while others, such as public market requests for proposals and team operations, are example of discussion items for the team to consider. Due diligence expectations of staff include accountability throughout the due diligence process before and after an investment is made. Diligence by board consultants is separate from, yet complementary to, staff's own diligence. The discussion format of IC meetings is intended to be inclusive and encouraging of differing viewpoints regarding the subject. Though voting is restricted to members of the Functional Asset Classes Internal Committee, investment staff of other asset classes are welcomed to attend and encouraged to share their knowledge and expertise. For example, when discussing an investment opportunity, staff collaboratively scrutinizes investments' merits and risks to help the underwriting team identify areas of further diligence. On required materials and distribution to IC, staff has established a baseline of analytical tools and templates to be used across asset classes. The output from such analysis is ultimately included in the due diligence considerations that must be addressed in staff's process. These considerations are built out in detail on this next slide here. The hexagons on the middle of the slide are some of the things we diligence for every single investment, regardless of asset class. I won't spend too much time on this slide since the content aligns with the consistent format of investment recommendations regularly brought forth by staff for trustee approval. However, I would like to highlight that around the perimeter of due diligence considerations, staff leverages third-party performance and risk software and analytical and research databases, as well as staff's own quantitative and qualitative analysis. The diligence work produced is ultimately refined by the investment office's collective judgment via its internal committees. Post an investment commitment, staff's ongoing monitoring of investments is captured regularly via the manager scorecard shared with trustees on a quarterly basis. Earlier, we opened the presentation by sharing that comprehensive due diligence is rooted in achieving LACERA's mission. Similarly, on this concluding slide, we highlight that comprehensive due diligence is in alignment with the investment office's strategic initiatives. These strategic priorities are reviewed and have been approved by trustees in January of each calendar year. The goal is to move towards becoming a best-in-class investor. Specifically, to enhance operational effectiveness, we strive for continuous improvement of processes. To optimize investment model, we foster inclusive conversations across asset classes to evaluate investments and develop each staff member's investment acumen. To maximize stewardship and ownership rights, we actively engage new and existing managers to promote adoption of ESG best practices, which have evolved quite rapidly in recent years. To strengthen influence of fees and cost of capital, we seek to influence terms and proactively evolve from term takers to term makers. To promote LACERA Tide, we initiate discussions with managers about LACERA Tide objectives, which we have found to positively influence adoption. This concludes our prepared remarks, which communicated staff's work on refining comprehensive due diligence and its relation to LACERA's mission and strategic initiatives. We welcome trustees' comments and questions.
Okay, great. We'll start with Mr. Santos.
Just thank you very much for the presentation. I could be wrong, and some of the staff who's been in LACERA at the same time or longer than me can correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe that this is the first time that we discuss the internal processes of the staff and the work day in and day out to make recommendations. And that is incredibly important because you have your own peers evaluating your recommendations. So you go out as an individual staff person, do the due diligence, and you become convinced that this is a good opportunity for LACERA. You have to make the presentation to your colleagues in the investment committee. And that is incredibly powerful in my view, because sometimes, we are human beings and we get too enamored with a particular proposal that was brought into LACERA, and your own peers are going to tell you, you might be too excited about this. Or on the other hand, they might agree with you and say, this is a tremendous opportunity. So this is very, very important. And it's something that we should discuss more often, especially for the new trustees, the training, because they need to understand a process. But I think I'm going to go beyond that. And that is the role of the individual asset class consultants. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, they also have their own internal investment committees. So every proposal, either because it's suggested by us or they brought it in independently, they also have their own internal committee that needs to approve the particular recommendation. And so you have the consultant internal committee making a recommendation for or against, and then we have our own internal committee, again, making a similar recommendation in favor or against, and then it goes to the CIO for final approval. So the two committees have to agree that this is not a good proposal or it is a good proposal. You agree with that?
Yes.
So I think that's one of the reasons why I have come convinced that delegation of authority is important, because of the processes that we have. And I don't see me adding anything beyond what all those internal committees have performed, because I'm only here for maybe a day. I can read the material and I have discussions here with my colleagues on the staff and the consultants, and then make a decision. But the staff and the consultants do all the work, and to me, it's incredibly important that we continue to remind ourselves that this is how we do business in LACERA, and this is why we have been successful. We need to begin to operate like if we were 100 billion, not 23 billion like we had 19 years ago. We need to operate at that level, because we are going to get to 100 billion in no time. And so we need to operate on that. So one question on that. So what happens if the consultant investment committee makes a recommendation? That recommendation comes to the investment committee of the staff. And what happens if the staff investment committee says, no, this is not a good idea, not a right fit, whatever the case may be? So that proposal dies at that point. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Tremendous. I think this is great. Thank you very much. Keep up the good work.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Santos. Mr. Knox.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And just so I'm clear, back on slide 3, it talks about the committees organized by asset category, each consisting of internal staff of that asset category. Do you ever invite members from other asset categories just for development and informational purposes?
Yes, definitely. Each of the internal committee meetings are open for the entire division to attend, and they are regularly attended by members of different asset classes in our meetings.
Oh, good. Yeah, I would think that would be important. Thank you.
Great. Ms. Jones?
Good morning. Thank you for the presentation. This was very thorough. I did have a few questions. I know at the very top of the presentation, you mentioned the different people that were part of the working group. And I understand that they all have their own responsibilities various divisions, you want to call it, or asset classes, et cetera. I think that would have been nice just for a public document that was identified, just so that we could see that the working group was made up of a group with diversified backgrounds, diversified expertise, who did this analysis. So it'd be nice to share that. The other question that I had, there was in the process, let me go to the page, where it says that the everyone on the committee has a vote. So that's on page 8. And so I was just curious, it says items must obtain approval of the internal committee to move forward. Are you looking at a majority vote, or is it have to be 2/3? I mean, how do you decide what is considered approval?
It's a majority vote at this time.
Okay, understood, gotcha. And then I guess my question, because I think if I understand correctly, right, the working group got together, they went and they analyzed and documented what they observed as, the processes for these different areas. Did any recommendations come out of that? Are they already embedded in this report? Or were they set aside for discussion for the future? Or how did that process work? I'm sure as you were going through this work, people may have had thoughts, ideas, or, suggestions. I was just curious how that manifested into this document, or did it?
Absolutely. I think in the early stages, it was very much like data gathering, understanding what each team is doing. But we also wanted to elevate in areas where we did have some gaps and maybe areas of inconsistency. So that has been addressed and embedded in this presentation as well.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you.
Great. Mr. Jones.
So a couple questions. So kind of a little bit off of Trustee Jones. In terms of the vote being a majority vote, do you all kind of track for purposes, just so, like one of the things I'd be interested in is how often is it a Supreme Court vote? How often is it 5-4 versus 2, right? And if you kind of dot plot those out, just look at the distribution, just to make sure that people don't feel like, oh, okay, well, I guess everybody else is voting yes, I'm going to vote no, right? So I'd be curious just to see what the distribution is, just to make sure that people aren't in what we hope is that tension by having everyone there, right? That it's not kind of getting overly smoothed over. So that's just kind of a nerd point of curiosity, but I think it'd be helpful in terms of thinking about optimizing how those teams work, and just make sure that unofficial coalitions aren't forming where, oh, okay, well, if so-and-so's for it, I guess I'm for it, right? Like kind of at that stage in order to keep that through there. So that's great. And then, in the 3 years that I've been here, and again, I know I'm one of the process nerds too. This is like hands down, like I told even Linda when I came in this morning, I said, I want to make sure that, they're giving us a presentation on this, right? Because I just think as a trustee, you hear about what the staff recommends, right? Because we know it gets here, but we don't necessarily know what kind of contortions went through before it got to us. So this was very helpful to do that. And I think too, Gina, from the audit committee, wasn't one of the things on the list was looking at the compliance of our due diligence process, just to make sure we're doing a relatively sample from a process standpoint. Here's a stated process. Are we with great fidelity?
Yeah, it's actually not a compliance. It's a consulting engagement. So it's sort of evaluation.
Got it. So I know at some point the process is great when you see it, and just making sure that over time people don't start cutting corners and everything of that nature in terms of the fidelity of the process. But just outstanding job, Cheryl and Cindy. I found it really helpful to know that. And I do agree with you, Herman. This should be part of one of the earliest new trustee kind of things, just so from internally they kind of understand what level of effort and engagement's going on before the recommendation gets to us to vote on it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great. And so I'll round out the comments. When I first came on board as a trustee, the first thing that I requested was a meeting with the team so that I could understand the processes, because the memo is only the tip of the iceberg. Now, of course, I knew that because this is the business that I run. And so I knew what to ask for at the beginning. And what I'll comment on is that the processes that I was introduced to 5.5 years ago are very different from the processes today. And that is just a credit and a testament to the effort that Mr. Grable has made across the team and the teams themselves coming together in order to build not just sort of, because they were also very disjointed processes that I was introduced to. You know, today there's a process, and you can't use the same process for every asset class, but I do think there's something to be said, and quite frankly, a learning opportunity to be able to sit in and opine on an asset class that isn't your main everyday work asset class, because you may have a perspective that may matter dramatically to an opinion. So I think that that's important. I also think that, you know, sunlight is the ultimate antiseptic. So I think that being forced to present this to all of your cohorts kind of forces you to put your best foot forward in terms of your work. So I think that there's that sort of incentive as well. The other thing I would say, and this is to Mr. Jones's point, I think you're very astute in making the point that these processes can quickly look very democratic, but become undemocratic when you start to get coalitions forming. And so I do think keeping track of your kind of ultimate votes will be helpful for you to understand, do you have, you know, 11 or 15 or 7 individuals voting, or do you have 2 cohorts voting, right? Because that is what happens. It's one of the ways that democracies start to fail, is when you only have a handful of cohorts rather than individual selective, you know, selectors. In political theory, it's called the selectorate theory. And so that's a really great observation. The other observation that I would give you for fodder to think about for the future is also, there are a number of studies that show that sort of the best and functional groups are groups where conversation points are shared, where you sort of each talk, you know, round about the same amount of time versus one single person dominating the discussion. That can also be sort of a sign of, you know, how many people are participating in the conversation, just as a matter of you understanding what your dynamics are. And that's just sort of like, you know, for future continued learning and improvement. But I will say hands down that the process has really come a long way, and congratulations to the work you've done. And I think we'll have to continue to make some presentations and this kind of this material immediately available to as part of the onboarding process for new trustees and even existing trustees who haven't seen it before, so that you kind of understand the journey that the investments go through before they land here. And some trustees have had the benefit of actually going along on due diligence meetings and listen to the actual investment committee meetings themselves. I certainly have, Herman has, and I do think that can be helpful. I call it a ride along. So, you know, that I think that there's value just to understand and appreciate what goes into it, because it gives you greater trust as a trustee to say, okay, they're doing their job. I'm not going to add much more to this conversation. And our job then becomes ensuring that the discipline of the process is being adhered to. That becomes our job. So we don't get to stop reading the memos. We still have to read the memos. And if anything, we have to read the memos more intently. So thank you for this. Any last comments or questions? All right.
Madam Chair, real quick.
Yes,
But as
Mr.
a new trustee, I you know, to echo that, I mean, this is huge. It's really, you know, understanding the process, you know, you can assume that the work's being done. You know, you guys are very thorough, but sharing your process. I mean, and I love some of the things in the due diligence expectations about being highly, you know, the work that goes in. Someone on the committee, it says, right, they're not going to bring something to the committee without a high conviction that it's something that needs to be addressed in committee, which means there's been groundwork already done prior to convince themselves, so to speak. So, so thanks. Yeah, it's really good. It's appreciated.
Thank you. Great. All right. Thank you for that. Awesome. Moving on, we will go to Makita Mr. Fila and Ms. Kiet to do our strategic asset allocation process review. That pillar upon which we make the decisions which rest the entire likelihood of us making it to $100 billion. No pressure.
Good morning. Good morning again, Chair Sanchez and trustees. So as you just mentioned, we're going to talk about the strategic asset allocation process review. This will be presented by Makita, and this is a follow-on from what we discussed last month concerning the SAA. And when I say SAA, strategic asset allocation for the public out there. So the goal of today's presentation is to highlight multiple aspects of the project and the analysis which will be utilized as we go through this process. So this analysis includes things like the capital market expectations that the board will discuss at next month's offsite, things such as reviewing the functional framework, potential asset category adjustments if need be, and also climate analysis, just to name a few. So the topics Makita will discuss today will be used to have more detailed conversations in the upcoming months to help inform your conversation and decision as we go through this SAA process. So that was my short introduction. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Phil and Makita.
Great. Thank you, Jude. Chair Sanchez, trustees. This has been an interesting meeting because a lot of my prepared notes have been borrowed, stolen, or otherwise appropriated by other people. So we're just going to wing some of this here.
Please stole your thunder. I'm sorry.
Perfect. So I think just on the introduction, Jude covered that really, really well. Maybe one point that I would highlight is strategic asset allocation is equal parts art and science. Each one of the different models and tools that we'll be utilizing has their own sort of unique constraints or flaws. So it's really important to put them all together, but also to approach it with a sense of humility that there's not one right answer to this. It's just an evolution of sort of where you are reacting to the capital markets using the best available tools, but still understanding that there is no right answer to this question that we're going to be exploring together. So with that, maybe we'll just go to the next slide, please. And Ison's going to take it from here.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. So I'll be going over a few pages in terms of strategic asset allocation is an exercise that is repeated regularly over time. But that said, right now we're in an interesting time period with respect to markets, in that if you look at the chart, it highlights well that we have been seeing a secular decline in expected returns, especially in terms of equity and bonds and the probability of earning the 7% in terms of the bar charts. And it looks like we are at an inflection point. And what we're seeing for 2023 is that expected returns have increased in Makita's 2023 capital market expectations, and the individual numbers are very close to 2010 levels in terms of the expected returns and the probability of earning 7%. A little further on the market expectations, capital market expectations, the next page. Thank you. And first on the process, as Makita, we update our capital market expectations every year, make it available in January, and changes are driven by a lot of factors, but mainly by interest rates, credit spreads, cap rates, and equity prices. Again, 2022 was a very interesting year. Pointed out earlier today, it was a year when both equity and fixed income markets were down. Same time, big magnitudes too, especially for fixed income. Very special year. And also most asset classes were negative, except for commodities pretty much. In that environment, interest rates were increasing, spreads were widening, and most risk assets declined in value. Silver lining is that means more increased return assumptions going forward. And how that works is basically bond yields increased by the largest amount since the 1990s. That is expected to drive the future returns for fixed income. And for equities, a bit of two tails, the tale of two cities, that while global projections for earnings globally is reducing, the price decline is driving some expected higher returns for equities going forward. Overall, something that I would like to point out, though, is there's again enthusiasm for the returns going forward. That said, earlier today in the CIO report, we saw that the markets are already off to a strong start this year in numerous asset classes, really driven by the US. But ultimately, the strategic asset allocation decision at LACERA will utilize MIKIDA's 2024 expectations. So there will be a reduction, minimization of a gap between what's going on live and what will be implemented. Next page, please.
Can I make a comment just before you move on to the next page, just to reiterate a point that you made? Obviously, it is not a secret that I also do asset allocation modeling. And one of the things I think it's important to understand, which underscores what Aysen just said, is that when you model bond re-ratings, the best way to make the greatest kind of return over time is either in a falling bond market or in a bond market where you adjust very suddenly and then start collecting that new higher coupon throughout the entire period, versus one where you adjust very slowly. So you end up with this whole ladder of different coupons over time. And so in some ways we got it, although it was very painful, we got a very fast adjustment of the fixed income markets and yield curve. And because of that, and the likelihood that we'll probably normalize here, we have a good shot at making really good yield over the next decade rather than just sort of dribbling it out. So I just want to underscore a comment that comment.
Perfect. So next we're going to move on to just a brief overview of the functional framework. This is one of the sections that I think we've talked a decent amount about already today. Just at a very high level, the functional framework is an overlay that we essentially put on the portfolio to replace the traditional approach, which is just to list out the laundry list of assets that you own. This is an attempt to organize it and also answer the question, not just what are we invested in, but why are we invested in it? So when you see structure reviews like today, each of the asset category teams will be tying their portfolio's roles and objectives. And I think that's something that's been a really impactful tool over the analysis of the last couple of years since this was adopted at the previous strategic asset allocation. So overall, we're probably not anticipating any changes to the overall high level functional framework, but would certainly be listening to any input that we receive from staff or yourselves as we go through the process if there's anything else that might be helpful, at least at this high level. Next slide. So just to go over some of the different categories. So the role of growth is really to be the primary driver of the long-term total returns. This is essentially your strongest asset in solving for that 7% target that you're looking for. Credit, we heard a little bit this morning, a more moderate return profile, a more moderate risk profile, provide some additional income into the portfolio. And I guess back onto growth, one thing that we also sort of briefly talked about was the exposure to China. So in our asset allocation modeling tools, at least at the equity level, we now have a series of assumptions across global equity where we can model with China exposure and without China exposure. And we're going to be showing you how that interacts with the portfolio under a couple of different scenarios. So that'll be a new part of the analysis that we haven't done before. And that's basically to be responsive to the conversations that we've really heard in this meeting room and also from some of our other clients. Within credit, we discussed some of that this morning as well. Potential changes might be consolidating the liquid and illiquid credit into one sort of category that catches all of that, called multi-asset credit or something along those lines, and then clearly having further discussion on the EMD exposure, which we talked about a decent amount this morning as well. Within real assets and inflation hedges, not really contemplating major changes there. Some of these decisions are going to be limited by real world characteristics. So to use real estate as a perfect example, because it's illiquid and because of the state of the real estate markets, it's very difficult to buy and sell assets and get true asset valuations currently. So you probably can't do a lot in a strategic asset allocation by radically changing those allocations. They're just, so you're better off just understanding what your real world constraint is, that you could move that number, but it would likely be painful or involve, taking market discounts. So some of it is while the real estate returns may not look particularly attractive in the models, you may be forced to deal with the real world constraints such as the illiquidity of the asset category. Next one. Just to round out the functional framework, risk reduction and mitigation, we also heard from that group this morning, and it doesn't appear that there are going to be very many changes, but one of the things that certainly was notable was long-term government bonds were something that hurt in the rising interest rate environment this go around. We certainly hope that that environment doesn't continue, but it does appear that we're sort of towards the end of at least the rapid hiking cycle. And so we'll be evaluating those through that lens as well. And then overlays and hedges, no real anticipated changes there.
Tim, quick question for you.
Sure.
Madam Chair. Do you anticipate, as we've progressed, 23 billion to 75 billion on our way to 100 billion, are there any other subcategories within our organization that you anticipate will be considering, given that we have more capability than maybe we had 5 years ago? Do you anticipate having that discussion with us at the offsite or as a part of the strategic asset allocation area at all? And if so, could you kind of hint at what maybe one or two of those might be?
Sure. I think from the strategic asset allocation perspective, the answer is no. At your investment size, where you've been really over the last probably 10 years, essentially reflects almost full evolution of, you're utilizing most available asset categories that are appropriate to you at this point in time. And certainly have implementation flexibility in our view within all of the different categories to approach any of those opportunities. So there won't be anything that you're not doing. As you do get bigger though, you actually start to face some constraints as far as the liquidity and underlying markets. So you don't have the ability to be super, super granular with certain approaches, or you're going to be too big of the market, right? If you were to buy certain asset classes, and you're not quite there yet, but eventually that's going to be the next thing that you're going to have to tackle. That, if there's a sub asset category that's particularly attractive, is LACERA actually too big, or do you have to implement it in some different or unique way? And then I'd say, related to the size, and not to steal from the other conversation, but I think we already hit on it a lot, as the capabilities of the staff grow, as presentations like the investment committees, the internal investment committees gets shared out with you all, that will impact the governance decisions much more than it would ultimately impact any of the investment decisions going forward, I think. So here I'm going to turn this one back over to Isa.
Yes, so in the context of the strategic asset allocation that we'll be conducting, we kind of follow a mosaic process in terms of putting various analyses together and looking at various vantage points highlighted on page 8, including namely the modern portfolio theory, which is a mathematical framework for looking at portfolios with a set of assumptions about diversification, efficiency of markets, normalization of returns, and ultimately we'll be looking at the value at risk there. There's a page later that we'll be looking at some numbers, and then risk budgeting, which is basically looking at the overall portfolio risks with respect to underlying components and the source and scale of risk from there, asset liability modeling, which integrates the liabilities, and the scenario analysis, which is forms of stress tests, looking at actual returns and some simulated scenarios, and climate aware analysis, a little more differentiated, specific to LACERA. We have done this before, we'll be doing it again. And then the liquidity analysis, which is a combination of historical factors, put it together and see what the effect might be on the status of liquidity for LACERA's portfolio. Talking a little more specifically about the mosaics that I just mentioned, the types of analysis, Risk budgeting analysis is helpful in terms of looking at what is the allocation to asset classes, but then how does that translate into the contribution of risk to the portfolio. And the reason for the difference is basically highlighted to the bottom of the presentation, that assets with low relative volatility contribute less risk to the overall portfolio. So it's not a mirror image, it's percentage weight and then what it means in terms of their volatility and the contribution to risk. Another component is the next page, the modern portfolio theory. Again, a set of assumptions. It's really helpful in terms of looking at some of the worst case returns, probability of experiencing negative returns, and ultimately, you have a return target. What is the probability of achieving at least? So 7 or more, and looking at it in terms of different time frames. Another way of looking again is in the next page, within the modern portfolio theory, value at risk. Just as a refresher, value at risk is a statistical measure, looks at what is the worst loss you can experience over a predetermined time period at a predetermined confidence level, which is 99% in this case. And then conditional value at risk is kind of looking at that tail risk, 1%. What is the kind of the average of outcomes of the worst things that can happen in that tail risk? So looking again at modern portfolio theory and value at risk measures. And then the next page, if you look at it, is about the stress tests that I just mentioned. And for that, we have 2 main sets, looking at what happened in the past, distinct time periods that were driven by distinct events that caused very specific returns. First one is on the negative ones in terms of some of the things going back to 1973s and including the rate spikes, recession, inflation. So you can see how the portfolio can behave if things like that happen again. On the flip side is the next page, positives. We like to have a balanced view. So we just looked at the negatives, positives too, if some of the positive things happen again, what it can mean in terms of returns. And the next page is the simulation ones, like, you can be more nimble, you can decide what things you exactly want to look at, which is, what happens if the bond rates rise, credits, spreads widen, narrow, or the equity markets decline or increase, so you can have a little more specific vantage points to what happens. And then if you look at the next page, is where we look at where I mentioned you'll basically tie the liabilities to the asset liability study, and that's where I will turn it over back to Tim.
Perfect, you nailed that one. So, we'll be doing various different simulations throughout the process, but this just shows a couple of the analytics where we're going to be tying it back to the liability. So this is really essentially for most people monitoring funded status, and is certainly an important consideration. Particularly as plans get better funded, it can change some of your asset allocation decisions as you're looking to sort of maintain some of that gain in funded status and reduce volatility. We'll be doing some brief survey work similar to what we did the last time around so that we can ideally capture your preferences and sensitivities. And maybe if you go to the next page, and that'll allow us to then optimize across a different set of dimensions. So instead of just risk and return and an efficient frontier, we're going to be able to look at it across multiple different categories. In this case, we're looking at the market value, so the funded status relative to funded status volatility. So we'll have multiple different tools, and really we're going to show you the exhibits that come through in the surveys that tie to what you care about the most. Last, on to climate. So the last strategic asset allocation review, we worked with your staff to develop a series of scenarios to review, just so that we were introducing the thought process and understanding some of the risks that are tied to various different climate scenarios. This time around, we're going to utilize some of those same models that have been refined a little bit over the last couple of years, but then we're also going to integrate some other analytics from third parties. So you'll get even a more robust view of some of the climate sensitivities. And just to sort of show you what that looks like, on the next slide, we have the classic box and whisker charts here. For each of the different asset categories that are presented, the one that will be on the left part of it shows you what the normal sort of capital markets expectations are. and what the surrounding volatility will be. And then the one that's to the next right of it would be under the combined scenario analysis. So sort of like the maximum shock that we're applying to these categories. And it's pretty clear just by going from left to right, wide or narrow, wide, wide. And so it really, like, you do see a dramatic impact. And I think being aware of just the increase in potential volatility from some of the climate scenarios will be helpful to you in making the strategic asset allocation decision. And then over to Eisen.
And then in terms of wrapping up the type of analyses, the liquidity risk analysis is the next one. And some call this the Armageddon analysis. It really looks at what can go wrong absolutely at the same time or in sequence, and what it might mean for the portfolio in terms of its liquidity. And liquidity is an important risk that we look at in addition to the traditional asset allocation process. It is important because the fund must maintain adequate liquidity to satisfy benefit payments and to having to sell illiquid assets at an unfortunate time at reduced prices. So for doing this, we basically look at a few things, including the benefit obligations, making sure that you're staying within your asset allocation ranges, assuming an annual rebalancing, and ultimately, do we think you may need to sell even illiquid assets, and how much is what the analysis is looking at. And the scenario, again, is designed to be extreme. I think that's why some call it the Armageddon analysis, but it assumes that years 1 to 3 have some of the worst returns in the recent past, really in this case from the great financial crisis. And then for the rebound, you see no rebound, basically zero. And then we take the cash flows from you to integrate the LACERA's net outflows for the years. And then we assume no liquidity for the very near term for the closed end, open end, and hedge funds. And then very limited liquidity right after that. And ultimately, we again assume that there's going to be a still annual rebalancing and see what is the liquidity status for the portfolio with those terrible assumptions. But with that, I'll turn it back to Tim in terms of reviewing the work plan timeline.
Perfect. Yeah. So this is something that we'll be sharing continually throughout this process. We're more or less taking almost a year to do the work plan for the strategic asset allocation, which reflects the importance of this decision for the Board of Investments and for the future of LACERA. So at the upcoming board offsite, we'll be reviewing in detail the capital markets expectations. Ideally, there won't be too many changes, but we know that markets have moved. So this will be one of 2 presentations on capital markets expectations. This will be a good question for you all to question any of the assumptions or methodologies that we use in the background. We're also meeting with LACERA staff, internal teams to go over those in detail. We already had a town hall meeting with them regarding the overall SAA and the capital markets expectations. We'll also be getting feedback from the other asset class consultants as well. So similar to the internal investment committees, when we do this, there's a lot of work that goes unseen, but certainly a lot of meetings and a lot of work goes into each one of these stages of the process. And then in the 4th quarter, we'll be doing some of the presentations on the individual asset classes, the climate risk and ALM modeling, and really ultimately looking to take action sometime in the 2nd quarter of 2024. We found that the best way to conclude these is so that you're able to make any changes to the IPS ahead of a clean fiscal year. So the idea would be to make any of the strategic asset allocation changes, any of the benchmark changes ahead of entering the next full fiscal year. And I'm not even going to summarize because I think we kind of hit all the points.
Great.
Don't want to take any more mic time today.
Yeah. Mr. Santos has a question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I think this process is incredibly important for us on the board, and I will encourage all my colleagues to make every reasonable effort to attend the offsite. The question that I have is during the Great Recession, coming out of the Great Recession, there was a lot of discussion about the fact that the modern portfolio theory had failed. And but here we are, and I know there was a lot of discussion to replace it with what, and I have not seen anyone come forward with a new theory. So, can you comment a little bit on that? Were we able to make some adjustments based on what we saw in 2008, 2009 failures of the modern portfolio theory? If you could elaborate a little bit more on that, I appreciate it.
Sure. I mean, I think the GFC is a perfect example of where modern portfolio theory did break down. The modern portfolio is based on correlations between asset classes not being perfectly one, but in times of great stress, you often will see those correlations increase, at least for short periods of time. In that particular case, it turned out to be a fairly long period of time. And it was quite painful. So the lesson and the takeaway is don't assume one of these things is the 10 commandments. That's why we use the multiple tools, and that's why we're talking about using the multiple lenses and the multiple tools, and that it being art and science, because we recognize that there are some flaws to the model. Correlations in short term can certainly change. We even saw it briefly over the course of last year. Fixed income investments, generally speaking, are supposed to diversify your equity risk, and clearly they were both impacted by rising interest rates, and you ended up having more adverse impacts on your fixed income portfolio over the course of 2022. So the model doesn't capture that, but that's why we have these detailed discussions. That's why we run the scenario analysis. And it's the only way to really account for the flaws in any different model is to not rely on one.
Good, thank you for that. And again, it's incredibly important that we make every reasonable effort to be there. Very important. Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for that. Moving on to our next item, which is still you. The BOI Offsite Governance Review Introduction, where we may or may not have begun the process before you were ready to tell us all about it. But this is I really like this presentation, so I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Okay. There we go. So just changing gears a little bit, and yes, some of this seems to have been set in motion, but I still think a lot of this discussion is relevant, and I think there were a lot of good things from this meeting today, in particular, hearing from staff on their internal processes and procedures, because there are lots of different dimensions to your governance model, and really it's super important to understand the details, like what's going on under the hood, and I think that presentation was very impactful from that standpoint today. So there we go. Not going to do the background because I think we already kind of hit on it, but it's more or less to align with LACERA's towards best-in-class investor aspirations, but I will talk through what we're going to be doing in July. And this meeting, we've had a couple of introduction sessions. We did a trustee assessment survey, which did not go well, and I apologize to everyone for that. We'll do better on the next one. And that will be integrated into the September offsite materials. And really, essentially, that's a broad array of things from policies and procedures to investment processes and decision-making, accountability and oversight. And ideally for that conversation, I just want to spend time on each one of the subjects. So we're going to show some graphics, we're going to discuss your responses, but really I want that to be a very active dialogue amongst you all so that we can have the opportunity to take some of the comments and feedback. And we're certainly getting some of those already as we've introduced this topic. And so we're starting to see some things come through in structure reviews already, but it'll be really important to have that conversation at the offsite. Then in October, we're going to look at peer groups, and that'll sort of tie in with the presentation today. There's no one right answer, but sometimes it's always nice to know what other kind of vessels people are sailing on. not that you're in a race, but it's still good to survey that landscape a little bit. And then in November, we'll be bringing back and discussing with you if there are any recommendations to changes in processes or policies or procedures. I think we pretty much covered all of that. So overall, we broke this down into two different sections. So there's pension fund governance models, and I'd sort of frame this in there are choices that you have already had made for you, and then there are lots of other choices that you control. So the overall governance model, sometimes and most times that's legislatively correct, established. So if you wanted to make changes to that, there would have to be lobbying efforts and get approval for any of those types of things. But within that, there are a few different models that have become somewhat typical. So on the left is the Canadian model, which is a very special and unique type of organization. It's a fully independent, fully expert board. These essentially function like asset management companies, even with the full independence of the board. It's very similar to a corporate entity at this point in time. They have fully independent investment organizations. They utilize a Wall Street compensation model. So they mostly will have global investment offices, even though their headquarters may be in Canada. They likely have investment offices and are trading securities globally. And these are very, very large funds. The Canadian model is notable because of the really, really strong investment returns that they've had. I would caveat that a little bit by saying that they also went very heavy because of their sort of long-term focus on private market investments and a little less sensitivity to liquidity. So that's been a driver of their returns. It's clearly one of the things that's also been a strong positive driver of long-term LACERA returns as well. But I would just caution that a lot of people point to the Canadian model as the holy grail, but some of it does have to do with the asset allocation decisions as much maybe as it does with the investment operations portion. Then there's the single board model. So that would be essentially not having a board of retirement and a board of investments. You would just have one governing body that sits over the organization. That's actually the most common for US-based pension systems, and it's used across plan sizes from the very, very large to the much smaller. Then there's the separate board model, which is the LACERA model, also used across plan sizes. The nice thing about that model is it does allow for the greater focus of you all to be laser focused on investments and oversight of that process and not having to divide your time with other considerations. The larger plans within this model, as we've sort of talked about a little bit already, typically tend to delegate some of or all of the investment authority to staff. So that's one sort of notable thing that we're clearly wrestling with a little bit here. And then there's the sole fiduciary model. These are basically the state level treasurer is often just named as the person who has fiduciary responsibility, and they decide what type of process or procedures underlie that. They might use an investment advisory council or some other mechanisms under it, but essentially there's one person who is named as the sole fiduciary for those plans. So most of that you probably can't change. And then as we go into the next slide, which is the investment models, some of these things you will have some ability to do, but we'll just cover them briefly. On the left is fully outsourced. A lot of people will call that the OCIO model. That hasn't been a prevalent aspect of public pensions, though it's becoming so, with the smaller plans that may not have access to private markets or the staff to get into more complicated asset categories. So smaller plans are definitely starting to use the fully outsourced model. There have also been some examples of some not great results from that if we rewound the clock about 10 years ago. Then there's retained authority. So that's basically where the board controls all investment decisions. Typically relies on the beauty pageant approach of staff doing a decent amount of the work and then a number of managers coming in and doing their best for 30 minutes or an hour to try and make you like them. And then there's the hybrid authority model, which is what LACERA is currently in, where there's clearly some is retained by the board and some is delegated. So LACERA is already delegated for co-investments and various different things, is going to contemplate the credit asset category. Oftentimes this can serve as a bridge between a fully retained as a staff and an organization grow and the capabilities expand or the assets increase. One model may be more optimal, but you still need to get from point A to point B. That said, that's used across plan sizes. Delegated authority is typically when it's delegated to either an investment committee that usually would comprise the CIO, possibly senior investment officers from a particular asset category, sometimes the executive director of the organization, but essentially delegates that authority to largely the investment staff. That's also used across plan sizes, so it's not just only for the very large plans. There are a number of smaller plans that also utilize that model. For the smaller plans that may not have as deep or strong a staff, there's a little bit higher reliance on the asset category consultants or others that they partner with to be utilized as a full extension of staff. In your case, the asset class consultants and the investment consultant are sort of more of a check and a balance in the process than a full extension of staff, but we do really try to work well with them. But our job is to represent you and oversee their processes and practices. And then lastly, there's the Canadian model. So maybe I'll stop there.
Can I make just a slight differentiation? In retained authority, there's really two versions of that. We were at the beauty pageant many years ago, 6 years ago, when I came on board, and we moved from beauty pageant to recommendations. So it went from 30 minutes of trying to make them like you and then a vote among the three to a recommendation by staff and an up-down vote. And now we're at a hybrid at recommendation up-down with delegated authority. Yeah.
Fair observation. Thank you. So maybe with that, I'll just see if anyone has any questions. I mean, I think we could go into more detail, but I think I kind of covered it just on the graphic slide. But if there's anything else that other people want to dig in on, I'm more than happy to kind of go through each one of these different ones, or we can skip to the work plan.
Just one question that comes to mind. In funds that use delegated authority to the staff, has there been an issue that that we should be concerned about?
Not that I'm aware that there's been an issue specifically tied to that. I mean, there've certainly been issues. I mean, I think everyone's followed what's gone on in Pennsylvania with the public schools and some of the other things that are out there. There are things that can happen, and the point of good governance is how to limit those things, right? There's always going to be an issue. There's always some level of conflict of interest or other things that happen to exist throughout an organization, and the governance is really the tool that you all use to mitigate that. So I can't say that there's been any, failings of the delegated model. I know there's been a lot of attempts to attribute investment success to the delegated model, such as, with the Canadian plans and some of the other larger US pension plans. I still think a lot of that comes down to delegated or not, just the strength and resources of the staff and your ability as like a large asset owner to make favorable terms, and then also have sort of more complex strategic asset allocations that just involve higher use of alternatives, and that's benefited performance. So I don't think there's anything conclusive on the performance side, but there's certainly nothing out in the universe that I'm aware of that says, oh, there's a fundamental flaw with the delegated approach that's emerged. I mean, the majority of those plans are really quite successful, but it doesn't preclude you from having an issue, whichever governance model you pick. Unfortunately,
they exist.
In the Canadian model that you describe, they do all investments, or the majority of the investments, in-house, and they don't. Is that true?
typically, for the most part, I mean, they're set up with their own, I mean, they'll still utilize external managers. So the private equity program, let's say within one of them would be 50% their own investments or co-investments, and then the rest of it would still be utilizing external managers. But across public assets, they pretty much do essentially all of their own investing on that side of it as well. But with private markets, they definitely engage specialists. So they may have their own internal absolute return or hedge fund strategies, but they'll still engage with externals across most of the alternative asset categories for additional diversification.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll make two additional comments. One is worth for us to think about, and Tim, I won't ask you specifically to comment on this, but just something that we should think about. LACERA is also unique in the way that we utilize our specialist consultants, because consultants can either be extensions of staff, which is actually probably the more kind of common use of consultants, or they can be extensions of the board that act as a check and balance on the staff. And that's the route that we have taken. I think there are pros and cons to both, but it's something to think about. The second thing is that each of these models also comes with certain costs that are associated with it that you internalize. So you either pay it out in fees or you pay it out in salaries. And there are these intangible benefits and costs as well. You know, your operations can become more robust as a result of that, and or the learning kind of mechanism within your organization can become more robust, but it's hard to assign a dollar value to that. So, you know, these are complex, diving into these business models that are used across. So you can say, well, the Canadian model is great and it has great returns. I think your point about the asset allocation is a really good one, but also it is a very high cost model as well. You know, when you're operating multiple offices around the world and paying people competitive to Wall Street, it is challenging. And so, you know, there are those things as well. So just some other kind of things to think about as we go into the offsite to kind of have more questions around this.
Those are great points. And I would just sort of maybe layer onto that, there are some other real world considerations. If you were to go to a more delegated model, you have to make sure you have the accountability and the reward mechanisms in place and balanced. But you also operate in under the constraints of civil service across most of the different employment layers. So there's a lot of different functional considerations that have to take place as we go through the process.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, on the offsite, has the agenda already been created? And is there a time frame that you've been slotted for? I'm going to CII, that's why I'm asking. I would like to be present if possible, if there's no conflict.
It has been. I don't know I can't remember off the top of my head which. I think it's the day one session is the day one morning, if I recall correctly.
I believe Tim is correct. I believe it is the second session of Monday. So before lunch on Monday. Tuesday.
Yeah. Mr. Green, I'll be with you at CII on Monday, and then I will be at our offsite on Tuesday.
Okay, let's steal away and come check it out. Also, and then I just, just for information on the Canadian model, is it, I understand why it's included because of its mass and what it produces and whatnot. Is it because of the size that they have such high returns that, more money makes money? And then the second question I have is there what is their governance? Is it internally set? Is it by the government? Internal policies or whatnot? And do they have any representatives of the people that they're providing this service to, the pensioners?
That's the primary difference in the model is essentially, for the most part, there are no sort of elected or representative people. The boards are constructed the same way. A corporate board it's the subject matter experts that provide the sort of high level governance on just that particular function. So they've been, essentially fully cast out to not do their own thing, but they're guardrails in place and governance structures, but yeah, there's very little involvement of the actual government other than, essentially giving them money when the money comes in and asking for money when the money needs to go out. That's primarily what the interaction is.
Okay, great. Any other comments or questions? All right, well, obviously let's invite ourselves to continue to do our own research so that by the time we get to the offsite, we'll have lots and lots of questions. Thank you. All right, go ahead and get through the timeline, please. Oh, I think we're done. And we're done. The timeline is done. Thank you. Okay. Wait a minute. All right, so moving on. The rest of the items are for information only. So any items for staff review?
I do not.
Okay, any items for future agendas? All right, good to the order.
Okay. Mr. Knox.
Thank you. Great meeting. Appreciate all the information. Just as a piece of information for the group, the Southern California Affinity Groups are having their annual mixer tomorrow night on the Nixon Peabody rooftop. This is for folks in the finance industry. And I'm kind of excited because it's the second year in a row that the Treasurer Tax Collector is one of the sponsors for the event. So if anybody wants any more information, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Green?
Just, continued thanks to staff and patience with the board's questions and to the board too. And we've discussed this in previous meetings, the robust discussion and the conversations and the questions. It's really good to be a part of it, and just thank you to all.
Thank you, Mr. Rue.
As always, appreciate all the information, the immense amount of information. A lot to absorb, and I really look forward to the offsite meeting that we're going to have, and the surveys. I put a lot of questions in there. Also, I just want to recognize that recently there's been a lot of labor strife, and I want to recognize all the hardworking men and women of the government. And probably one of our board members not here because is probably dealing with issues. But hopefully the labor strikes don't get larger and it gets resolved, and we make sure that those men and women on the ground in the front lines get what they deserve and are respected during these very volatile times.
Thank you, Mr. Rue.
Mr. Jones?
Yeah, another kudos to staff again for level of preparation for today and presentations. And then just a special shout out to my progeny. I brought my daughter to work. Brought my daughter to work today to kind of expose her to some of the stuff that we do here and things of that. So I appreciate the interns and everything kind of sharing their experience with her. And then lastly, I think one of the things that I also wanted to encourage the board in terms of the offsite, and I think it was one of the staff items from last time. I think we were supposed to have a folder that was kind of inclusive of some of the things that you all are thinking about that we could kind of study ahead of time. So I just want to, A, looking forward to getting that, and then B, encouraging my fellow colleagues. And I like to do mine with wine and on the deck. But whatever is your favorite beverage, just kind of enhance our preparation, I think, ahead of the offsite in terms of maximizing what we can do together in that time. So
Thank you, Mrs. Jones.
Yes. And I thank you. And I want to echo what Trustee Jones said. I would love to get the information ahead of time, but I would like mine in writing, please, and printed paper. He wants me to get automated. I'm not there yet. I'm old school. I need to see the paper and hold it. But if there is information we could have ahead of time, it would be great. I do look forward to the offsite. Last year, I learned so much and it was, very informative. So I look forward to this year. And it sounds like, or not sounds like, it is clear that we have a lot of big decisions to make as we look at the whole asset class, the governance. And so we don't take those decisions slightly. So obviously these type of events will help prepare us to make the best decisions possible. So I'm looking forward to it. I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sanchez?
Thank you to the staff presentations. Asset allocation is incredibly important for us. And that's probably one of the most important roles that this board can play. And having diversity of opinion is really important. I'm very happy that our distinguished captain for the fire department is going to be there for the asset allocation piece, because it's important. We need to hear from different perspectives, and that's how we come to, in my view, the right decision. When you listen to other people's opinions that may not be the same as yours, it really goes a long way, and that's why I am very happy to hear about our process here, the investment committee process, with the staff pretty much can veto one of your colleagues' recommendations. It's incredibly powerful in my view, because we're dealing with people's money, dealing with our money, and we have to take that very, very serious. So thank you very much for that. Also, looking forward to mingling at the outside. It's very important for us to have those separate conversations individually. So looking forward to seeing everybody soon. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, trustees. My favorite thing to do is to introduce new people to the board. I'd like to draw your attention to Adrian Gonzalez, who I think is in the back. Adrian joined us last week, I believe. So this is week 2, or he came back for week 2, which is a great, and hopefully there's week 3 and well beyond. Adrian joins us from the Capital Group, and prior to that from Pathway. He has experience both in private equity, underwriting funds, co-investments, as well as in investment operations. And I believe that you cannot be a good investor unless you understand investment operations. It's just absolutely critical, especially, as we've, a common theme that we're discussing is increased complexity of the portfolio. One thing I'll add about Adrian is Monday was our first day together in a committee meeting. One of the things that didn't come up is that our committee meetings are in person. And Adrian, hit the ground running. And I think it says a lot about, it's hard to be the new person in any situation. As the new person, Adrian availed himself of the opportunity to ask questions about a prospective investment, follow-on questions to those questions, follow-ons to those follow-ons. And I think it really shows that what we're developing here is durable and sustainable, that new people are additive day one. And I think part of that obviously is Adrian is a great add to the team, but kudos to the work that our internal committee team has done. So thank you to staff, and thank you for the board for listening to that, and welcome Adrian.
Welcome. All right. Okay, well, thank you. I feel like every meeting we continue to elevate our discussions, and I'm so pleased that we are all learning together. And I think one of the things that I want to make sure is that the next, person or people who join the board as trustees get the benefit of all this learning that we're doing, so that they can come along with us rather than have to learn themselves in the same period of time. So I do want to make sure that we are creating libraries of learning and onboarding, because it's wonderful to see us having this conversation at this level. Second is I had the opportunity to moderate a discussion at PPI this past month on artificial intelligence and machine learning. And this is a topic, it's the topic du jour right now. It is like every conference has at least one, if not two, dedicated panels or comments on this topic. And one of the things that I would remind everyone, it just sort of struck me as I was preparing for that PPI panel, is that this is a very old concept. We've actually had a lot of these algorithms have been around for decades. What we didn't have was processing power. And so to some degree, processing power and the ability to store mass amounts of information and collect mass amounts of data is what has changed. The actual approach to how we create these algorithms has actually been around, I would argue, for decades. I would just kind of remind people also too that much of this learning, this machine learning, is still very, very directed by humans. So for those of you who are concerned that HAL is going to take over, I don't think we're getting there anytime soon, because HAL is going to be run by Sam in the background, who can be a man or a woman, just saying. I will say that this is something that I've obviously done for decades. I am a specialist in machine learning, and have been doing it since 1997. I'm no newbie to this area, but I find it fascinating, the sudden, laser focus on this. I think that there's a lot that can be done with the power, and I think that we can do more today than we used to be able to do 20 or 30 years ago. But I think as investors, we have to remind ourselves that there's opportunity and there's hype, and we need to make sure we understand the difference. And this is one of those things that I don't think is going away. I think the computing power is here to stay. That genie's out of the box. And so what we do with it and how we work with it is going to be a question. And I think one of the things that came up in the PPI discussion, which is a whole host of other institutional investors and pension funds, was what are our ethical responsibilities as investors to think about the elements of inequality that occur from mass adoption of technology, of the sort of, what happens when you permanently ingrain bias into selection algorithms. What does that do? And so I do think that this notion of what is our responsibility in making these investments and holding investors, VCs, accountable for sort of what they're enabling. At the end of the day, you can say, well, I didn't realize Facebook was going to break democracy. Well, it turns out that we probably should have thought about that. And so I think that because technology moves so fast, it means that we as investors have to think about what are we contributing to. So I would leave you with that sort of food for thought as we continue down this discussion. I don't think it's going away. Okay. With that, I will take a motion for adjournment. Oh, wait, we're not motion.
We do have executive session. They are FYI items. So if nobody.
Yeah. So let me actually poll the board. Do we have, because there are very well prepared memos. Are there any questions that you would like to have an opportunity to ask, and don't feel like, I think it can be as quick as it needs to be, but we can go into executive session, or if you feel like everything in the materials answered any questions you had, we can go back and have lunch and begin some of that preparation that Patrick speaks of.
I think for maybe just pro forma purposes, we should go into executive session. And if it turns out it's really quick or whatever else, then
that's fine.
Quick, but
all right, let's do this. So let's go ahead and take 5 minutes and clear the room for executive session, and give everybody an opportunity to have those questions. Thank you, everyone.